I'm Mark Kidwell. I'll kind of be your tour guide today as we go through a discussion on the role of consultants versus integrators versus equipment manufacturing. Um, I have here with me on stage today Kurt Kincaid from DCS and Tony Santoro from Talus Engineered Products, and they'll be representing their perspective viewpoints in this discussion. As we go through this, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I mean, certainly we can take questions at the end as well. There are microphones in the aisle. We'd ask that you use those so not only we can hear you, but we can capture you on the recording as well. So feel free anytime during the presentation of any of us, if you have a question, just interrupt. All right, so let's talk about why this decision matters. Why does it matter whether you use a consultant or an integrator or an equipment manufacturer or some combination of all three? Well, the partner you choose can make or break the project. As you guys know, many of you have done automated projects. They're typically high capital and high risk. High risk to your organization, to your business. For some people, they do one large project every 5 to 10 years, and they're risking the business when they do it. And so it's a very important thing from the client side of getting this right. How you choose and which partner you choose can obviously impact the cost, the timeline, the performance output of the particular system, and then the scalability. Is it built for now or is it built for the future? And can it scale to get you there? Some of the common outcomes of poor alignment are delays, scope creep, and technology mismatch. Sorry, my thumb is slower than my mouth. So there's three partner models we're going to talk about today for options in material handling automation. There's consultants, pure consultants who are not employed by equipment manufacturers. There's equipment manufacturers, and then there's system integrators. And each of the two gentlemen on the stage will talk about, how those two models work. But what you're really asking, what the organization is really asking, is what are the questions behind the decision? What questions should you be trying to answer as you go through this process? Who should define the solution? How much risk do we want to own? This is probably the number one thing as a client you need to consider and need to evaluate. Money follows risk. It always has and it always will. And you need to understand how much risk you're willing to own and how much you're willing to pay to eliminate the risk. What do you need? Do you just need equipment, or do you need strategy or execution, or is it a combination of all three? And the complexity of the project usually drives that. And what do I do if something goes wrong? What happens? Each viewpoint, each model has its own pros and cons, which we'll go through, and the risk associated with those pros and cons. So the consultant perspective, what does the consultant bring to the table? The consultant should help you define roles and define the value proposition. The consultant should be independent or agnostic. They're vendor neutral. In a consulting opportunity, we don't look for brands, we look for solutions. Brands comes later as we determine what the solution is. They should be able to bring you market research and benchmarking. What can you expect from this type of solution? How do I evaluate multiple solutions within the same, let's say you're looking at a goods to person. How do I compare those and evaluate those in a very neutral way? How do I define the requirements? Specifically here, the business requirements, not just the throughput and rate and feeds and speeds, but what's the business require around performance metrics? Maybe it's order cut times, maybe it's inventory accuracy, maybe it's any variety of things. How does this support my business's growth strategy across the next 3 to 5 to 10 years? Is it scalable? At what point do I outgrow it? Or how fragile is it to changing market conditions or changing customer order profiles? Consultants should help you choose solutions intelligently around those business requirements, and they're not going to build them for you, but they should be able to walk you through that process of what matters, how to define it, and get alignment around what you're really trying to achieve before you even start designing a solution. So, where's the best fit for a consultant? All three of these points of view up here have a fit, but they also have a best fit. So where does a consultant fit? What's the strength of a consultant? Well, consultants should be objective. They don't care about brands. They don't even care about type of solution. They care about solution that meets your business requirement. They should have broad industry experience and exposure. They're familiar with all the things we see out there on the floor, all the things that do apply to you, and just as importantly, the things that do not apply to you. There's a lot of solutions outside of these walls. Not all of them are right for everyone. The consultant should be basically your tour guide to help you understand which ones fit for your business requirement needs. And a consultant should be very strong at early stage planning, building those business requirements, helping you develop the business case and the definition of what success looks like. What does a successful project look like when it's over? And define that from the very beginning and not after the design's already done. So what's the limitations of a consultant? Well, consultants don't own the execution. They own all the planning, the definition, and the coaching, and the project management, and all that nice stuff, but they're not accountable for the quality of the execution. That's not what a consultant does. It might slow a project down if you're going to hire a consultant on the front end to do all this pre-planning and defining requirements and things of that nature. It can make a project go slower. It's not always something that's available to you. Time is not always something that we have. And a lot of consultants don't have deep actual execution integration experience because that's not what you hired them to be. They can project manage, but they don't understand necessarily integration, not nearly the way an integrator or an equipment manufacturer might, because they know the equipment and they know the execution difficulty and the complexity of each solution better than a consultant will usually. So what's the best fit for a consultant? When are we the best choice? Well, if you're in early discovery, defining a business, or greenfield planning especially, where do you put the next DC? What's it going to look like? What's the mission of it going to be? Those type things. When you've got the time to develop a strategy. When you've got a lot of complexity around stakeholder alignment. I spent a few years of my life on the client side, and the internal politics was almost always the hardest part of a project. Trying to get operations aligned with engineering, aligned with IT, aligned with fill in the blank. and getting all of that consensus and agreement and alignment around what is the right total solution, because everyone has a different perspective on that, and doesn't mean anyone's right or anyone's wrong, but everyone has a concern. What's this going to mean to our operation and to my particular function? And getting that internal stakeholder alignment can be very difficult. Another best fit case for a consultant is when the organization lacks the internal expertise to project manage. One of the things about using the consultant model is if you want to buy direct from, say, an equipment manufacturer, you are essentially, as a client, you are the integrator. The consultant is not. And does that client have that type of experience to pull that off? Sometimes they have the skill set, but they don't have the bandwidth. If that's the case, then a consultant can be very helpful in filling that gap and playing that role for you. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tony Santoro from Talus and let him kind of cover the OEM perspective.
Thank you, Mark. Before I move on, I figured this might be a good opportunity if anybody has any questions regarding consulting specifically. Okay. As you can see, consultants are very good at extending timelines. So we're going to talk here about working with OEMs. Obviously, we live and breathe our product every day. We have the experts. We have the internal, research and development teams. Any issues that you might have if you're working directly with an OEM, you have direct access to basically the smartest people about that product. You can have access to the products that we're working on directly, what's coming in the future. One thing that might be beneficial too is if you have a certain application or need you're trying to solve where you might want to do something custom and specific. In that case, it definitely helps working directly with an OEM. Faster decision making within the scope. Obviously, if you're communicating with us directly, there's no middleman there. We don't have to set up meetings externally. You're working directly with us, and inherently, it'll speed up the process. From an engineering standpoint, so like I said, we've got the R&D team. We have the product specialists, the support people. We can get everybody together that you would need, and typically working directly with the OEM from that standpoint is beneficial. So in terms of strengths, limitations, best fit, so product mastery, when we wake up in the morning, we're focused on our product. We're not looking at other people's products, other parts of the facility. Obviously, we're aware of what's going on within a material handling system, but our focus is our product. Lower equipment costs in some cases. So obviously, if you're working directly with the manufacturer, there are times when the price will be lower because there is no middleman. But we were talking about this. I thought that is not always the case, and I wanted to use just like a regular day application. So for those of you in the room that have kids, if you've ever bought an Xbox or a PlayStation, you can go to Microsoft's website and buy an Xbox on their website. But you can also go to Walmart, Amazon, etc., and it's going to be the same price. So just because you're working directly with the manufacturers, it's not necessarily 100% that it's going to be the best price, but there are times for sure. The direct manufacturer support. So I would say for the most part, there's a lot of, throughout this whole facility, whether it's an OEM or not, there's a lot of people with industry knowledge. They've been doing this for years. So it's not always the case. Some people that don't actually work at the manufacturing company know our product and other people's product very well. But inevitably, the people that know the OEM product the best work for the company. Limitations. So single technology bias, like I said, when we wake up in the morning, we're focused strictly on what we make, not on everything else that is out there. So if there's a heavy focus on a single technology, there's a benefit there, but if you're looking at multiple different technologies, it might make sense to go another direction. Limited system-wide accountability. So one thing, if you do decide to work with this manufacturer, that manufacturer, this one, there is obviously a high chance of maybe getting some finger pointing if you're having some issues during commissioning, while you're running the system, customer support. That's definitely something you want to keep an eye out for. Integration often pushed to the customer, 100% here. So if you're working directly with the manufacturer, we are not an integrator. So you need to have a strong project management team internally, a lot of know-how and a lot of internal resources to be able to take that on. So the best fit for an OEM solution for you is when the scope is narrow or well-defined. One example when we were talking about, so racking, if you guys here have ever added racking or put racking in a system, that's a great time where you might want to consider reaching out to the rack manufacturer. So that's a good example there. Single technology dominates the solution. So there is times when you're looking at a solution that's one of product X. I'm going to use racking to keep that analogy going. And there's not multiple different things going on. So that obviously will make it where your internal resources, you wouldn't have to have as many in the know-how, et cetera. So that's a good one there. And then I mentioned this, but you got to have a strong internal project management. Mark alluded to, obviously, you've got, your internal, possibly silos, engineering operations, safety, et cetera. So you got to be able to navigate that internally and handle the project yourself. So those are the best fits for when I would say you would want to work directly with an OEM.
All right, so we're transitioning really into how do you bring all the pieces together? And that's really where a system integrator shows its greatest value, is we're the connection points between all the different pieces of the puzzle. So we're looking at the end-to-end solution that is defined by the consulting team that has the pieces of the OEM. So we're adding our value the most when there's multiple OEMs involved, and we've got to connect a lot of different systems together. That's where our expertise lie, because we do not make any equipment. That's not our goal. We want to select the best equipment for the application and then bring all the pieces together. We're going to have the controls to be able to bring those pieces, the software to bring those pieces together. And then we're also experts at managing the installations and commissioning. That doesn't mean the OEM is not that in some cases, because most of us in this room know a lot of OEMs do system integration. They really do. They do it when they have the equipment is majority theirs. Where a system integrator plays the best is when 50% is that OEM, 50% is that OEM, and we really need to start bringing those two pieces together, and it gives the end user the accountability to choke one throat. Y'all need to have that ability to come to one person, get what you need, and basically have that accountability to one person versus multiple people. So what are some of the pros and cons? So our strength is we're going to look at the system holistically. The business requirements have already been defined. They've been defined by consultants. They've been defined by the end user. We want to make sure the system is meeting all the requirements for the business, and holistically, it's going to meet that need. It's not going to meet that need in packing. It's not going to meet that need in shipping. It's going to meet the need throughout the system. We are going to reduce the integration risk. It's called a system integrator for a reason. We are going to integrate all the pieces together. And it's clear responsibility of outcome. You need the system to hit this rate. We are going to hit that rate, not that one piece of equipment hitting in that rate. but the entire system hitting that rate. Where are our limitations? We can cost more. We are buying equipment. We're not in it. We're not a nonprofit, 9 times out of 10. So we want to make a little bit of money while we're doing it. It requires a lot of good partnerships with our OEMs. We have to have those conversations to say, what is the right application for your piece of equipment and how does that apply into the system? So we have to have very strong partnerships. And then integrator quality can vary widely. Some of the biggest things is I would encourage everybody in this room, when you're looking at integrator, understand the connection points in their WCS, their WES. Those type of pieces are the key to a systems integrator. Because if you don't have the connection points, it's not going to work out, and that quality can vary greatly from integrator to integrator. But what is the best fit? Oh, I was told y'all couldn't hear me. So we are best when there are a lot of different OEMs that got to be tied together. When it's not just a single manufacturer, that's where we're going to add the most value because we're integrating the different pieces. Aggressive timelines. Because we have those connection points, we understand how to connect the points, we can quickly adapt to the different technologies and get this equipment. Plus, we also have a lot of multiple relationships because we're agnostic to the equipment. We can look at lead times from multiple different OEMs and allow you the ability to select one that's going to meet your timeline. Because there's a lot of technologies that will do the same thing, as everybody sitting in this room has been seeing on the floor this week. And it really does reduce your risk because you have one throat to choke. You go to one person, and that is the person you're going to hold accountable to make sure everything is done. So we've kind of went through the strengths. Is there any questions, strengths and weaknesses of the different, is there any questions before we keep moving on through this? Either we're really good at explaining or we got people who are tired from walking the floor all day today and you wanted a break. So thanks for joining us for your break. So if you're looking at side by side, all three have their purpose in the supply chain and understanding supply chain needs for you. Consultants are going to be the best when it comes to defining your roadmap, understanding your business requirements. That's what they're great at. That's what they're going to do great. OEM understands their equipment better than anybody else. They made it. They understand it. They're going to be the experts. And an integrator really is going to look at the full system and bring all the pieces together. Now, we all know that each of them have their place. Some of them are slower, some of them are faster. It just depends on what your need is, on what is the requirement. Sometimes you're going to pay more for an integrator. Sometimes you're not because we have buying power. That's okay. But you have to evaluate how much risk do you want to take on, how much ownership do you want to take on, and that is the comparison you're going to have to make when you're making this decision. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark as he takes us through some of the costs, and he's going to continue this journey.
All right, so talking about costs that are beyond just the system. The equipment costs what it costs, the project costs what it costs. But there's the upfront cost, the check you write to get the system built and installed versus the whole life cycle cost of ownership, cost of maintenance, even getting into things like some of the financial considerations, the depreciation schedules, which ones are written off on which type of schedules, how does that affect your operating cost or your P&L or things of that nature. Those are all real. A project doesn't just cost the price tag you get quoted from a consultant, an OEM, or an integrator. Change orders and gaps, scope gaps. Each model has its pros and cons. every project of any complexity ends up with some type of change order slash scope gap, not because anyone made a mistake, but because you always learn things as you go through a project, especially a complex one. You know more 6 months into a project than you knew when you started, and that changes things. That's fine, but those are costs you need to consider. And when you're planning for a project on the client side, as a consultant, I would tell you, you need to have some money in your budget that you haven't already committed to spend because you're going to spend it. It's going to happen. You try to minimize that, but typically, especially on a complex project, there's always something that's going to occur. How big of a burden is this going to put on your internal resources? It's not about necessarily do you have the skill set to do it, it's do you have the time to do it. I can't count how many times on the client side that I was managing an engineering team, and my team could do all the things that needed to be done, or they could do their day job. And so we'd bring in help, people to augment our own internal resources so that they could continue to do the day job and we could accelerate the timeline of a project. Those are all real things. And then the cost of delay. If a project delays and doesn't hit the timeline that you've established as a client that you need to hit, what does that mean to your business? Not just the cost of the project. Maybe there's costs that are incurred to the vendor that you've chosen to do the work for you, but what does it cost the business beyond that? Almost none of the time are delays free when you're running a business. It costs you something that had nothing to do with the cost of the materials you bought. So those type things are very important to consider and try to put some type of value to as you go into a project. So who owns the risk? This, as I said in the beginning, risk can be the most important consideration in a project. How much are you willing to own as a client, or how much do you want to be able to hold someone accountable for as a partner? You know, a consultant-led project, you as the client, you are the integrator, and you own the risk for the most part. That's the consultant is not going to be held accountable for how that system performs. They didn't buy it, they didn't install it, they didn't commission it. It's one of the great things about being a consultant. Just being honest. But on the OEM side, they're shared risk. They're going to be accountable for their product to do what they said it would do, but not necessarily for the whole system to do what you expected it to do. What they sold to you will do what they said, but what happened upstream from them or downstream from them is not in their scope of accountability. They're going to ensure that their part works correctly. In the integrator-led model, the integrator owns the risk. They're accountable for total system performance. They signed up for it, you paid them for it, and they own it. So risk really matters when you're determining which of these approaches is the right one for you. You've got to decide as an organization, how risk averse are we, or in this particular case, how much risk are we willing to accept ourselves? And there's always a trade-off. So, the red flags, things to watch out for. You need a tight scope, always. And on the consulting side, that starts with the consulting scope. What is the consultant signing up for? What are you getting from them? Have a tightly defined scope with clearly defined and aligned deliverables. What are you getting? That spills through all the way through the project with the system, with integration, whether it's cost, whether it's timelines, whether it's performance. What are you signing up for? What does success look like? How are you going to measure it? And determine all that and document all that on the front end. You want to be aware for people that overpromise timelines. I tell, as a consultant, I tell clients all the time, we're going to bid this project. And we're afraid of outliers. People that say they can do it either really cheap or really fast. They scare me. They scare me more than the ones that come back high. Because the ones that come back high may be adding value, but the cheap and fast scare me. They're usually over-promising, or they didn't understand what you asked them to do to start with. References, or lack of references. And that starts with a consultant too. Who is the consultant work with that is like you? You know, I call it the people like me story. Tell me about people like me you've worked with. And if you're talking to consultants, you want to know their experience in your area. Same with OEMs, same with integrators. Who have you done for people like me? Change management, because there's always change. There's always change orders. How is that handled? How is it documented? You want to understand that on the front end. When changes occur, not if. When changes occur, how are you going to communicate? How's one of the three of us going to communicate with you as a client? How do you want it to be done? Define these type of things on the front end. And making sure you have clear ownership. If you choose the integrator model, you have clear ownership, usually, for all of it. That when you get into things like software, that can get a little fuzzy sometimes. But define and document who owns what and who do I talk to about all of these different either product types, brands. Know all that on the front end so you can avoid the finger pointing and gaps on the back end. Well, I'm not accountable for that performance. That's not in my scope. You want to try to eliminate as much of that as possible. Okay. So what are the key decision factors? Obviously, Tony talked about project complexity or lack thereof being a great reason to go direct to an OEM. And it is. But that matters. How complex is your project? How much internal expertise do you have? How much internal expertise do you have available to work the project? Because most of these projects are months long, if not years long, especially the larger, more complex one. And can you really give up that much internal resources across that long and have a realistic plan to account for that? I keep coming back to risk. Risk tolerance. How much will you accept? How much will your ownership accept? How much can you tolerate? I can tell you as a client, anytime I've done a big project, a big DC project, I know. I bet my career on that project because if it went south, I was looking for a job every time. I know that. So how much risk tolerance am I willing to accept as a client? How much budget flexibility do you have? If you've got a hard cap number and the quote you get to execute that system is all over that number, there's a good chance you're going to be going back asking for more. Sometimes the price goes down. Nah, it never goes down. Having budget flexibility, being realistic about what it's going to cost to actually execute the whole thing. And then another big one is timeline urgency. Kurt talked about that. Some models are faster than others, and sometimes you don't have the luxury of time. You've got to get this thing done by this date. For whatever the business requirement reasons are, acquisition, growth, obsolescence, catastrophic situations. We've dealt with clients that lost their DC to a tornado. The whole DC is gone. Well, now you've got some urgency. So what's the speed to implementation is much more important than cost when you're in that type of situation. So timeline urgency can absolutely be a critical factor.
So as we kind of wrap this up, as a system integrator, I'm going to bring it all back together anyway. So what do you need to remember as we're going through this? There's no one size fits all when you're making these decisions. Every project needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. What is your real goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Don't get hung up on the next bright, shiny toy or the hype that's out there. Look at every situation independently and evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. Clarity of ownership and risk is one of your key decision makers, and it needs to be evaluated every time. And then alignment matters more than the label you're putting in. Be aligned in this decision, be aligned in what you're trying to accomplish to make sure we are, or y'all are hitting your objectives.